Deadpool negative. I had actually wanted to do this further down the line, but the recent release of the JFK assassination files have kind of maybe want to do it now. A quick explanation. Three of the, well, one of the most memorable, I shouldn't say great, and two of the greatest comics I ever read were drawn by Vince Giarrano, artist who was big in the was employed fairly regularly in the '80s up to the mid '90s and departed and became a successful fine artist. And I was planning to do a trilogy about all these works, but I decided to strike the irons hot. If I had to pick my favorite comic of all time, my absolute favorite comic of all time, it wouldn't be an Alan Moore book, it wouldn't be a Grant Morrison book, it wouldn't be a Chris Claremont book, it wouldn't be a Simon Furman Transformers book. And to my surprise, it wouldn't be a Hernandez Brothers book. Nope. It is Badlands. Badlands is a comic about, well, guess. It was originally the first issue was published from Vortex Comics in 1990, and the rest of the series did not materialize. And then a few years later, 6 issues were published by Dark Horse Comics. I still remember when I was going to college in New York in 1997, going to the bottom floor of the uh, Virgin Megastore, if you remember that, and buying a copy of this. I'd known about Stephen Grantham's work on The Punisher, which I thought was okay. But, later I've become to appreciate it more, especially the original miniseries, which is still one of the best Punisher stories of all time. And Giarrano I was known of, but I was more used to his more image-inspired later '90s work than his more clean, realistic style here. And I wasn't really into I was a big JFK lore fan. There was a point in my life where I thought Oliver Stone's JFK was the best film ever made. I don't feel that way anymore. Um, but it was just Giarrano's astounding artwork, just expressive and brutal and sexy and all sorts of confused that sold me on it. I read it and I've read it 100 times and it never gets tired to me. It never is boring. It is a impeccably paced, impeccably scripted, just fascinatingly done series about the man who killed John F. Kennedy. Um, in August 1963, ex-con Conrad Bremen gets out of jail for car theft. Now, at jail, we find out his jail experiences weren't that great. But he runs into his old prison buddy Janetti. Janetti offers him a job. Bremen tries to doesn't want to take the job, but he's got no family. There's a great example of how good Giarrano is. On this page right here, Connie finds out his mother moved away while he was in jail, and my apologies, but look at this amazing scene of this grown man who's probably in his early 30s, curled up in a fetal position, um, by his under his staircase. Just amazing. Um, and now what you're thinking is, so what's the angle? Why is he being? How did this guy I become? Who's behind it? That's what you're probably thinking. Like, what is the angle Grant is trying to analyze here? He's not trying to tell a story about why JFK was killed. He's trying to tell a story from the perspective of the guy that really did it. I mean, the idea basically here is like Oswald was a patsy, and this was the guy who was really there, who really pulled the trigger, and why he didn't get in front of Jack Ruby's bullet. Um, what's funny is there's a character named Oswald, addressed as Oswald in the book, but it's not really a whodunit. Well, if you studied your JFK lore, you can pretty get a good idea of who's behind all this and why, or just, you know, but Grant isn't interested in that. He's interested in how Connie Brayman survives being made a pawn by this Texas billionaire, who seems to be connected to the mob, the CIA, the Cubans. Janetti sends him to work for this billionaire, and and the daughter. The only real woman in the comic is his daughter, who Connie Brayman is forced to look after, even though she's crazy and likes to really. Well, you'll see. But her name's Annie. It's a lot for the first half of the book. It's Connie and Annie trying to put up with each other, while Janetti and the billionaire and other strange people whose names we never knew discuss Connie's suitability for the task they're going to put him in. And again, impeccably paced. What I loved about it is just the slow sense of like Connie Brayman. He's not a bright person. He's not even a particularly likable protagonist. The only thing that's really good about him is that he's surrounded by people who are very much worse. But he is a sympathetic and compelling protagonist. And it's small things. He starts noticing familiar faces, in different roles at the house, at the billionaire's house. He opens up a Dallas newspaper, finds a threatening letter about JFK addressed, with his name signed to it. And then it's like watching a noose being slowly tightened around someone. And Janetti, his old buddy, Janetti has his own reasons for wanting Connie Brayman to pull the trigger. And they're interesting ones. I mean, I think Janetti, the very first scene of the book is Janetti dealing with a witness to the assassination. And he is, hands down, one of the best villains in fiction I've ever read. And he has his own desires, but they're not the desires you expect. Nobody in this story, you never really get the sense that any of these people plotting this thing have any strong political beliefs, or that all they're trying to do is find the best way to get JFK killed. And again, it's funny because I don't want to show you some of this artwork because it's spoilers. But on the other hand, it's just so amazing. Just the way the violence is staged, the expressions on characters' faces. And again, Janetti is just so wonderful and so bad. And Brayman is just this poor guy stuck in this mess. And Grant's script, every time Brayman thinks he's got a way out, Grant finds a way to box him back in. I mean, there's this great, I love this scene. It's just so perfect, especially if you know your JFK lore. I mean, it's just beautiful. And it kind of wounds me that this comic isn't as beloved as it should be, because one of the things I always talk about, one of the themes I find fascinating, I said this in my review of E.L. Doctorow's Ragtime, is that history swallows us all in the end. The characters in Ragtime are peripheral to larger events, but they get crushed under the weight of its momentum. In Badlands, Connie Brayman is the man who changed the world. But by the end of the book, no one knows who he is. He has no prospects. No one knows who he is. He's just another anonymous face in the crowd. He won't. Again, don't want to spoil it, but it has one of the most amazing conclusions. The final confrontation between Brayman and Janetti. But it also makes you think that is how history works. The people who plotted to kill JFK were not thinking about changing history. They were not thinking about what it meant. I mean, they had their reasons, but the important thing is they wanted to get the job done. And this comic is about the tool they used to get that job done. And that's what makes it so compelling and frightening and tragic and especially at the end, touching. I mean, again, Connie and Annie aren't exactly the best people in the world, but you feel for them anyway. And that's the big trick of the book. Stephen Grant populates this graphic novel with some really ugly people, and there's no white hat to be found, and you still care what happens to them. Even Janetti. Janetti is one of the most unique villains in fiction because what he wants is so bizarre and twisted, and it's done out of for the strangest reason of all, but the most common reason of all. But again, I can't say what that is, and that's for you to read. Now, the copy I have, believe it or not, is signed by Mr. Grant, and which I believe this was signed actually in 2022 at Baltimore Comic Con. And like you can barely make it out, but this was signed by Mr. Giarrano in 1999 at a New York comic convention before he left the industry and became a fairly successful fine artist. But if you're thinking about JFK in the news right now, the series went out of print at Dark Horse and then was republished by AIT Planet Lar in 2002, I believe. Then republished by Dark Horse in 2018, and I think it is still in print at that company. I mean it when I say this is one of the best comic books I ever read and probably my favorite comic book of all time. It is a perfect thriller. There is not an ounce of fat on it. The dialogue is perfect. The artwork is perfect. The pacing is perfect. The ending is perfect. There is literally nothing I can dislike about this comic. That's how good it is. And I really, if any of you are watching me, please believe this. You will not regret reading Stephen Grant and Vince Giarrano's Badlands. Anyway, thank you very much, and I will talk to you later.